Hey everybody, just a very small note before we begin this episode. Our guest Justin has shared with us an ebook about in-house banking that complements this episode. It is not mandatory at all. You can listen to the episode and still get everything. As you will see, some in-house banking tasks can actually be outsourced, and Treasury Outsourcing is exactly what this episode is about. Head to corporate-treasury-101.com, head to the article section and look for the one with Justin to download the ebook for free. The link is, of course, in the description. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast. This is the second part of our full interview with Justin Callaghan, where we discuss how Treasury outsourcing works. In the episode of today, expect to learn how does the transition happen when a company chooses to outsource some treasury tasks. How do they keep an eye or control over what is done by the company to which they outsource? What happens if your treasury outsourcing company ceases activity? What systems are used by the treasury outsourcing companies? And like always, much more. Treasury outsourcing, when done right, has very interesting intersections with Treasury Consulting, which made for a very interesting conversation with Justin, who has a tremendous amount of knowledge in the field and managed to answer very well some of our toughest questions. We hope you will enjoy the episode. If that is the case, and when you're thinking about how you found our podcast, chances are that it was through word of mouth, social media, or a recommendation from your favorite podcast platform. And this is our only request to you. The best way you can support the podcast is to head to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Corporate Treasury 101. That will mean the world to us and help more people learn about treasury. On another note, this episode is brought to you by Automation Boutique. Automation Boutique is empowering treasury, finance, and risk management with tailored automation solutions. They use robotic process automation, or PA, AI, APIs, and Power Query to create automations that can work with your existing systems. We partnered with Automation Boutique as we really like their approach to innovation and how they help the industry. For this partnership, they came up with an AI-powered automation self-scan that can help you find out if a business process is suitable for automation and how to best get started. It is totally free, non-intrusive, and only takes about 15 minutes. What's great is that the report you will get from the scan helps you determine if the benefits of the automation outweigh the costs. If you want to have a look, head to the link in the description or to automationboutique.com/corporate treasury 101. And with all that being said, please welcome Justin Callaghan. Justin, thank you so much for this. I think we have a very strong understanding now of what treasury outsourcing is and how it functions. So let's deep dive into how it actually works for the corporate, but also for the treasury outsourcing company. So starting by the beginning on the corporate side, how does the transition happen when a company chooses to outsource some treasury task? And typically here, I'd like to understand what's the business case in the first place to get treasury outsourcing? Because you mentioned quite some economical value out of it. So I'd like to understand that. Like, how do you enter into contact with a company that say, okay, I'd like to consider some treasury outsourcing, or is it a good thing to do? And then how does it typically work? Like, okay, we need to outsource this type of function, or do you educate them on what they should be outsourcing? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, no, that's it's a fair question, and like to answer that question, you kind of, I suppose, you need to examine why a company would wish to outsource. What is the thing that is making them outsource? Because that will often drive how the interaction would proceed. So there's a number. We see a number of sort of different elements to that, and all of them have different nuances, even though at the end of the day it results in us providing some form of service to them. So if I think and these are in no order of sort of preference or anything like that. This is one is as common as the other, but in many cases there might be some kind of catalyst for a requirement for a particular service. Okay, a big one would be something like an acquisition or a spin-off. Okay. So if I think about a client that we onboarded recently enough, And they made they're a very large US-based client. They made an acquisition that all of a sudden massively increased their international footprint. Okay, so now and the acquisition the acquisition they made had a pretty good banking structure in place with one of the global banks that was also a partner bank of that client, right? So now they've made this acquisition. They have a kind of a nice banking structure, and zero balancing or currency pooling or whatever. And they're looking at it and they're going, well, right, how are we going to manage this? So they have a kind of an immediate problem that they need to deal with. So under those circumstances, what we can do is we can step in and say, well, look, we can fix that problem for you very quickly. So that's.
Do they know about it? Sorry, Justin. Do they know about the possibility of outsourcing treasury, or how does it work here?
Yeah. So that
you look at the mergers and acquisitions news and after those companies.
No, well, we do try to identify opportunities in that realm, but interestingly enough, So we could go out knocking on doors, right? And we could knock on 1 million doors. And the chances of us finding some lad who wants outsource their treasury is reasonably low, in fairness. So we focus on being known at the catalyst point. Okay. So in this case, right, it was a bank. A bank said, "Well, you're struggling with this. You don't know how to manage it. We know these guys do that sort of stuff. Have a word with them." Now they won't necessarily recommend it because they're a bank, right? But they will say that it is a solution that you should investigate. That's what happened in this case. If you think about it, that happens a lot, right? Because if you think about it, let's say a bank is pitching for a global liquidity structure, okay? Zero balancing in 40 currencies across 30 countries. And they've done all the maths, and it's going to save this company, 10 million a year, and it's going to give them access to $300 million, and it's all brilliant. And the treasurer is going, "That's brilliant, love it all. Well, how the hell am I going to manage it?" Yeah. So now we have a bank that wants to sell something, right? We have a client that wants to buy something, but there's a bit in the middle about how do we look after this? So if we're close to banks and stuff like that, right, and they can put our solution forward as an option, just as an option. It's just a discussion. We often have discussions and they don't come to fruition, and the bank doesn't get the deal and we don't get the deal or whatever. But it is an option, right? And it's an option that really any corporate looking at one of those significant changes should investigate, right, to see if it's one for them. So that's how it's a very intuitive question because that is how that comes about. And a lot of our growth is actually from that sort of reference stroke, being with the right person at the right time. And it gets back to that concept of catalyst. So if you can identify the catalyst, then you can see who's the catalyst driver, right? And they're the people that you need to they're the people that need to understand your potential solution. So we talked about an acquisition there. So another thing might be just the introduction of a new process. Okay, so let's say a company wishes to implement an intercompany netting process, and again they're saying, okay, great, makes sense. We can. It all adds up. We can see the benefit, but geez, we just don't want the hassle of having to run all that process and manage all that. Well, then we can come in and say, well, look, we can do that, and this is precisely how we'll do it. Again, that's a very straightforward sort of proposition. And then there's also sometimes, this isn't very often the case, but sometimes people are just looking for cost savings. So they're saying, well, look, I have this going on and it's costing me a fortune. Why can't we just do it this way? Like for instance, right, like let's just take netting as an example, but it could be anything. Companies might have developed an internal netting piece of software, for instance, right? You'd often see that, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of spreadsheets and databases and stuff like that, and there's one guy who kind of knows how it works and no one else in the world does. And
speaking truth here.
Yeah, and you've seen this, right?
That's how we both laugh. We both see that. That's exactly how it goes. And when that person leaves, the two just
exactly. Or a new treasurer comes in and recognises the risk, right? And they go, well, look, there's a better way to do this, and so our services become sort of obvious from that perspective, and then another sort of catalyst for wanting to outsource is a resource issue. So in some jurisdictions, it's virtually impossible to hold a full treasury team and incredibly expensive. So really, do you remember I mentioned those services where we're providing sort of systems, back office, middle office, right? They're very attractive in those jurisdictions. Northern Europe, Switzerland, places like that. It's hard to hold a treasury team. It's extremely expensive to do it. And a treasurer may just recognise that risk and say, look, let's just do this another way, and let's look. So those are sort of the catalysts. So I sidestepped your question, which is sort of how does it work? So we would generally having had that initial engagement with a client. Okay, our first thing is to understand precisely what their requirements are from a process perspective, and we try to keep that big picture. So we will say, okay, we understand that you have a pooling system, so you need daily cash and liquidity management. That's what this will look like. Okay, so and we would have a reasonably detailed spec. So it'd be things like, okay, we will do the cash positioning, we'll manage all of the ZBA flows, we'll identify the currency flows, we'll hedge them back to base currency within particular risk parameters. We would define quite well in our proposal the things, the steps that will be undertaken. Because in fairness, often clients kind of don't understand them, right? Because they're coming into something new or fresh. It's a new environment. They've made an acquisition. So they need to feel comfortable actually that, what's going to be done is correct. So we would agree that spec. Having done that, we try to take over as much of the implementation effort as is possible. And the reason for that is quite simple, is that we kind of know what we're doing, right? We do it all the time. Okay, so us to integrate a ZBA structure, to get all the bank flow information into our TMS, you do it in a day, whereas if you were trying to do it yourself from scratch, you'd be looking for a developer for 3 weeks, and you kind of would never get done, right? We, for instance, we use FXall generally for trading, but we're agnostic as to what trading platform we would use. But we would have an STP link directly from that into our TMS. Again, if you were trying to create that again, from a starting point, it's a lot of effort. So that's why we take a hands-on approach to the implementation. And really, the only thing we expect from the client is any data that's required. So generally, that would be things like static data. The names of the subsidiaries that will be borrowing. We'll get some tax input around transfer pricing rates that need to be applied, stuff like that. And then we will create the whole atmosphere, the whole environment in terms of the TMS setup and the likes. And then importantly, what we do is we agree a set of procedures with our clients, which kind of generally outline what needs to be done when, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. And we agree that with them. Generally, then we'll move into kind of a testing environment whereby we'll do things like test accounting flow, for instance, right? So we provide test accounting files into the back end ERP system. We'll do like penny tests on payments. We'll do test deals on the FX platform. And then when we have all of what we call the infrastructure set up, we move into the interfacing phase, which is where we start to roll out those services both internally and externally. All right, so we start dealing with the banks on clients' behalves, and then we also start all of the internal communications in terms of if there's statements required, if a company, a subsidiary needs to borrow funds, how do they do that? Who do they communicate to, etc., etc. So
I like that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's quite a formal process, and obviously we have a detailed implementation plan and stuff like that. But our main thing is we try to do as much as possible. That's the sort of driving force. And like, to be honest, we're doing that because yes, it's attractive to clients because they're kind of going, okay, cool. But day one, they need to trust you, right? So they're on board with us, and we hold weekly calls and all that sort of stuff. And also, to be honest, it's easier for us to manage the implementation because we do it so often. We kind of know how to go about it. And as long as our clients have confidence in us and we're showing progress in the right way, then it works very well for both parties.
How do the corporates keep score? That's one of the things you mentioned in the cons, right? The losing control kind of. How do you mitigate that as a treasury outsourcing company? Like, how do you make sure the company can keep an eye or even control over what is done by the company to which they outsource? How does that?
It's a good question, and kind of a fundamental part of the trust that you need to build. To build with clients, and there's an element of sort of pre-engagement. You need to demonstrate the ability to do that. So pre-engagement with a new client, we for a start will always encourage them to talk to some of our current clients, right? To understand the field, because we have formal processes around this, which I'll explain to you in a minute, right? But at the end of the day, you need to talk to someone to understand how it works in operations. You can say we have reports, this, that, and the other, but if they don't work, they don't work. So day one, we encourage people to talk to our other clients to understand, to get that feel for how it works. And before I get into the kind of the formal processes that we adopt, it's important to remember that when we engage with a client, we truly become part of their team, right? So we like our front office team will be interacting with clients every day. You know what I mean? It's a day. There's a daily sort of back and flow of information, depending on what the client requirement is. Some clients want you just to do things and stay away and just give us the end answer, whereas some want to be much more involved. And that's fine. We can accommodate either way. Like if I think of the formal sort of processes though around that, right, because it's all very well for us to have those are kind of informal processes, right? They're kind of their meetings, their communications, and their building a trust, right? And those are probably the important things for the teams, the treasury team, for the assistant treasurer and the treasurer. But try selling them to internal auditor, and you'll be in big trouble. So
Definitely.
So we definitely have a very formal approach to this, right? So the first thing that we will do is we will agree risk parameters within a procedures and controls document with all of our clients, right? So if you think about it, those are simple things like, for instance, right, if our exposure is in excess of the currency equivalent of $250,000, we want to hedge back to zero. It's a very simple parameter, all right? And so therefore we will look at currency exposures resulting from all of the activities that we're undertaking, and if they breach that limit, we'll hedge them back to zero. And we produce reports on a daily basis that will show that all exposures are within those limits. We'll operate within counterparty exposure limits for investments. For instance, you might say you're only allowed to have up to 100 million in that money market fund, etc., etc. So the general risk parameters that you would expect to see in any treasury policy in reality also would apply to the operations that we undertake. So that's one very well defined way. Now we produce daily reports for all of our clients that will sort of prove that we're operating within those activities, and that's very important. The other things that are important are those third party accreditations that I mentioned, about the SOC 1 and stuff like that, and also we welcome our clients' internal audit in, whenever needs be. The other thing, right, just to put a bigger sort of framework on it, right, is that we day one we create an infrastructure that is very risk averse for a client. Okay, so all of our clients have their own TMS database, for instance. Okay, they have their own bank accounts, which are their bank accounts. Okay, you know what I mean? There's no commingling of funds, none of that sort of stuff. Everything is ring fenced on a client by client basis, and that will include FX dealing relationships, for instance, and importantly, really importantly, the banking systems. So bank accounts and banking systems, there's no mix, commingling or anything like that. Each client is operating within their own defined environment. They have their own defined standard settlement instructions established within that environment. And to give you a concept as to how that works, right? We for instance will be set up because we need to make settlements. Okay, we're doing FX deals. We need to make settlements on behalf of clients. But we will be set up within the EB systems to only be allowed to make payments to a bank account where there is a locked down pre-format template in place. If you think about that, right? Now, to put that lockdown pre-format template in place, we generally will input it, but then it would need to be approved by our client. Do you see what I mean? So they have ultimate control over that sort of payment environment. And we have lots of other sort of control, system-based controls in place that ultimately limit the risk. So there's a number, to get back to your key question is how do they keep an eye on us? We have a kind of an established framework in terms of systems. That means that only certain things can be done. It's only possible to do certain things within that environment. And then in terms of kind of risk elements and risk reporting, we have both those soft communications, but also importantly, we have the kind of the daily reporting that will be produced. And then the final sort of guard on that, I suppose, is our accounting process. So we run accounting processes for clients at least monthly, but a lot of the time either daily or weekly, to be honest. And obviously that's kind of a control. And even things like we undertake bank recs on a daily basis for all clients, and then we have to kind of prove those bank recs. So there's all the sort of controls you would expect, and then the external reporting back to clients as well.
Very clear. Okay, so a lot of it is around making sure that, again, you're plug and play, right? Every time, as soon as they come in, they get access to all of this infrastructure, all of this systems and everything straight away.
Yeah.
And is the integration there's just a lot to set up, right? What's the onboarding process like for a corporate in that sense? Like, how much time does it take to get ramped up then?
Yeah, so it's not as complicated as you might think. The key external integration that we need to do is generally to integrate with Corporate's bank. But as I mentioned, generally speaking, we're dealing with a handful of the big banks, right? So they're pretty well used to it, as are we. And then on the back end, reintegrate back into the ERP system from an accounting perspective. And then if people are going down the forecasting route, then we'd also look for sort of ERP integration from an underlying AR and AP perspective, to get those data flows. But again, these are things that we do all the time, so they don't generally take as long as you might expect. So we would generally say that if we're onboarding a client, the implementation phase is anything from 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the complication of the process that they're putting in place. But even kind of a pretty complex client, generally 12 weeks will get us set up. Often our clients actually like to slow it down. So we'll put all the infrastructure in place, but you need to have an internal change management process as well, right? You don't be scaring people off by giving them too much to bite off. So for instance, we might introduce just the management of the daily pools, right, and then layer on maybe netting at a later date, then maybe layer on some FX at a later date. So there are kind of ways of softly progressing.
Yeah. Treasurers are very risk adverse people. Is the common theme that keeps coming up in most of the conversations that we have. So yes, you guys have the certification. Again, apologies for pushing and being a little bit of a devil's advocate here, but you have the certification, you have the clients' testimonials, they've spoken to your clients, whatnot. Nonetheless, you're another counterparty risk for them, right? In most situations.
Well,
or not.
I suppose just to be clear, we are a service risk, but we are not a credit counterparty risk at all. Just to be clear on that, do you know what I mean?
Explain the difference.
Well, there is no financial exposure to us in terms of funds. If
you're executing trades,
we
right?
are executing.
You have access to bank accounts.
We are executing trades, but we're not. There is no funds held in the name of FTI Finance on behalf of clients. Do you see what I mean? So there is an execution risk. There will be an execution risk. there's an execution risk everywhere, and our argument is that if you have your execution in a well-managed and controlled environment, it's much less risky than having it in a kind of a two-man shed in Benelux or something like that. You know, sorry, not to cast aspersions, but no, you know what I mean. Like if you look at where kind of treasury disasters have happened in the past, right? It's always been sort of a very small satellite, not correctly controlled environment. You know, if you think of from an Irish concept, we had John Rusnak in the trading on behalf of Irish banks in the US in a small office. You know, do you know what I mean? And there's been various other corporate sort of disasters which I won't go into, but they've always been in. You know, that's sort of where the risk is lies. So you know, we would suggest that it's safer to have it in a well controlled environment with a reasonably large team. That is well segregated.
I think what Hussam meant as well is in a sense of you hold processes and knowledge, right? Especially if you outsource for an extended period of time. Yeah. The Treasury department and the company is completely reliant on, I mean, we're saying you, but Treasury outsourcing services in general, right? Yeah. Not FTI in particular, but you outsource some strategy, you outsource how the money is managed and how certain things are executed, and you might lose knowledge. But actually, whilst we were asking, I'm also thinking, that's the same thing if an employee would leave. If a small treasury department has one of their key employee leaving, you're in the same embarrassment as if your treasury outsourcing company
is more likely to leave than treasury outsourcing.
Actually,
is likely to.
Well, right. I see one of our points, I suppose, is that we are a treasury outsourcing company. That's all we do, right? So if we leave, we don't exist anymore. whereas in the past, in the past, in fairness, like banks were big in this, and they did leave people high and dry, and it was a problem. Do you know what I mean? But
because they're doing other
correct, you know. Well, so whereas this is our core business, we're in it for the long run. It's a key selling point. You know, we have a very well defined strategy in terms of corporate treasury and outsourcing. That is our strategy. You know, if we don't claim to be anything other than that, we know it's a niche market, but we believe that we can perform very highly in a niche market, and that's a good space for us to be in. You know, so yeah, like I hear what you're saying, but one of our selling points is that we have this team, right, and you're not exposed to that person leaving. You know, you have this cross-trained team of people that are doing things. And if at some stage in the future you want to bring it back in-house, you're dealing with a professional organisation that'll help you do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not going to just run away and leave you high and dry. If things change, and for whatever reason, like for instance, if one of our clients gets acquired, right? You know, the new acquirer might take the view that, oh, no, look, we're already managing some of this stuff in-house, so we'll migrate that. Grant, you know, we'll help you get there.
We'll do the handover.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so
long game.
It's you need to tease through the detail to understand the risk profile, I think, of the business model, and I think from our perspective, the sort of the proof of the pudding is the fact that we're dealing with some really, really large multinationals, you know, with, you know, massive audit requirements and internal audit. And we pass the muster on all those, you know, and before we ever, well, not always, but generally speaking, before we go live, you know, engage with a client or sign a contract, we're subject to massive due diligence from both kind of an IT perspective and a kind of a process and internal audit perspective. You know, sometimes to the extent where you're kind of wondering why, you know, why does he need to know what colour my socks are, you know? But look, we're happy to do that, you know. That's the nature of the business, like, you know.
So take us through that, and so move over to, like, what does it mean for you when a new client comes in? So what does that look like? And indeed, so I guess why we're saying this is Treasury is such an integral part of the oil of the company, as you mentioned it before, right? So and it's what you said as well, like perhaps the only reservation that people have typically with service is just lack of control, almost, or the perceived lack of control, right? At the end of the day, if you're reporting very transparently, if everything is in place, if they have full transparency into your systems whenever they want, if you're complying with all audit requests, then none of that actually exists. It's just a perception that, hey, how can I have someone else managing my bank accounts?
Yeah, but as I said, we rarely operate in a bubble. Okay, so like we have all of our clients. We have a boss. It's like a boss, right? And it might be the assistant treasurer, or it might be the head trader or something like that. But he's our boss man, kind of, right? And we are engaged with that person all the time. So they're well aware of kind of what's going on, and they're fully in control. We take direction from them, so they are controlling, right? So really, how do you control a team of people is what you're asking, and again, it's easier to control a team of people when they're a third party in many ways, because they are subject to much stricter contractual requirements than
applications,
just people who are working for you. So like the control element is actually overcome very quickly once people kind of understand the sort of the risk environment, as I said, the infrastructural environment, and then also sort of the manner in which business is undertaken. And you asked, when a client comes in and talks to us, how do we explain that? Well, we actually will sit down and walk them through our sort of processes, how we do things, and show them in our office, physically how this works, and how the communications works, the sort of reporting they'll see. And then we also, obviously, you always, will offer to undertake any kind of due diligence or whatever sort of requirements that are required. So it's something that ironically doesn't really it comes up, right? But it comes up and it gets dealt with reasonably quickly. It doesn't become a sticking point.